They called him the Underworld King not because he was loud or cruel in public or hungry for attention, but because nothing moved without his permission. Breathing space, territory, silence, fear, all of it belonged to him. That night, the city glowed beneath glass and steel as his empire gathered in a private hall above the streets. No music played. It never did when he was present. Music distracted men. Silence reminded them who was in control. Every chair was filled with someone dangerous. Men who had buried enemies. Men who had sold brothers. Men who smiled only when blood was already on the floor. And at the center of it all, he sat calm, untouched by the tension he created simply by existing. His wife sat beside him, perfect posture, unreadable eyes, a queen trained not to react. She knew the rules. Everyone did. No one spoke unless spoken to. No one touched what wasn't offered. And no one looked too long at what belonged to him. That's why the room shifted when she entered. She wasn't announced. She didn't ask permission. She simply walked in, slow, deliberate, as if the entire empire had been waiting for her without knowing it. She wore no jewelry. No visible fear. Her eyes didn't scan the room the way newcomers did. They went straight to him. A few men stiffened. One lieutenant lowered his gaze instantly. Another reached for a glass he didn't need. Somewhere in the back, a breath caught. The wife noticed all of it. The Underworld King said nothing at first. He watched the woman approach, his expression unchanged, but something in his stillness deepened. The room waited. Boys. She stopped just short of his table. Close enough to be dangerous. No one remembered inviting her. No one dared ask why she was there. Then he stood. The sound of his chair sliding back cut through the hall like a blade. Every conversation died mid-thought. The woman didn't step back. She didn't smile. He moved closer, not touching her yet, close enough that only she could hear him. And then he did the unthinkable. He lifted his hand and gently held her face. Not roughly. Not possessively. Intimately. A controlled gesture that carried more threat than violence ever could. The wife's fingers tightened slightly in her lap. She did not move. But she saw everything. The Underworld King leaned in, his lips near the woman's ear, and whispered a single word. Tonight. That was all. One word. Quiet. Almost tender. But the effect was immediate. The room froze. Tonight could mean many things in their world. A deal. A death. A confession. A betrayal. The woman didn't respond. She only met his eyes, steady, knowing, as if the word confirmed something they both already understood. Then he stepped back. Just like that, the moment ended. The woman turned and walked away, disappearing into the same silence she'd arrived in. No guards followed. No one stopped her. No one breathed until she was gone. The Underworld King returned to his seat as if nothing had happened. He reached for his drink. Took a slow sip. Only then did the room begin to move again. Subtly, nervously. Men exchanged glances they shouldn't have. Power shifted in the smallest ways first. It always did. The wife turned her head slightly toward him. Her voice, when she spoke, was calm. Do I need to know her name? He didn't look at her. No. That answer landed heavier than a slap. Across the room, one of his most trusted lieutenants stood quietly and checked his watch. No one noticed, except the wife. Minutes later, that same man excused himself without explanation. The wife watched him leave. Then she watched her husband. And for the first time in years, she saw something unfamiliar in his expression. Not desire. Not guilt. Not fear. Anticipation. Whatever tonight meant, it wasn't new. It had been waiting. Outside, the city continued as normal. Cars moving, lights flickering, unaware that something ancient and dangerous had just been awakened. Inside the empire, order still stood. But it was standing on a fault line. And somewhere in the dark, the woman who had no right to be there carried a truth powerful enough to make kings whisper instead of command. Because when the Underworld King whispered, "Tonight," he wasn't making a promise. He was starting a countdown. Power doesn't collapse in explosions. It collapses in delays. 3 days after the whisper, the first crack appeared. A shipment from the docks, untouched for years, guaranteed safe, never arrived. No hijacking. No police interference. It simply vanished. Containers worth millions dissolved into the night like smoke. The men responsible swore loyalty. Swore innocence. Swore they'd die before betraying him. The Underworld King listened. He didn't shout. He didn't threaten. He only asked one question. Who knew? The answer should have been simple. But it wasn't. Because too many people knew. And that had never happened before. By the end of the week, money started bleeding from quiet accounts no one was supposed to find. A judge who once answered calls immediately began delaying responses. A rival crew stopped showing fear. Nothing dramatic. Just hesitation. Just doubt. And doubt was more dangerous than bullets. Inside the mansion, the silence grew heavier. The wife watched carefully. She had lived beside power long enough to recognize instability. Her husband wasn't reacting the way he used to. He wasn't punishing publicly. He wasn't demanding blood to restore order. He was distracted. Every night, long after meetings ended and soldiers were dismissed, he retreated to the private study. And every night, without fail, the woman arrived. No one announced her. No security camera captured her entrance. Yet she appeared. The wife never confronted her directly. Queens didn't chase ghosts. Instead, she built her own quiet network. Maids, drivers, overlooked assistants. Invisible people saw everything. What she learned disturbed her. The woman had no official record connected to the empire. No payroll history. No known family ties. But 15 years ago, before the Underworld King ruled uncontested, there had been a violent internal purge. 3 founding members executed for disloyalty. One of those men had a daughter. And that daughter had disappeared the same night her father died. The wife closed the file slowly. Meanwhile, in the study, doors remained locked. No one knew what was said inside those late-night meetings. But subtle changes began rippling outward from them. A long-standing alliance was dissolved without explanation. A territory once deemed untouchable was quietly abandoned. A loyal captain was reassigned to a powerless position. It was as if invisible hands were rearranging the board. The lieutenants noticed. They gathered in dim rooms, speaking carefully. He's changing, one muttered. No, another replied. He's being changed. That thought lingered like poison. The Underworld King had built his throne on predictability. His cruelty had logic. His decisions had precision. Now there was hesitation, microseconds of it, but enough to be felt. And enemies felt it too. Across the city, a rival faction tested boundaries. They stepped into a nightclub that technically belonged to the king's territory. They refused to pay a small tax. They smiled too easily. They were waiting for retaliation. It didn't come. Instead, the king summoned the woman again. This time, he didn't touch her face. He stood at the window, looking over the city he owned. You're accelerating this, he said quietly. Her voice was calm. No. I'm revealing it. Revealing what? She stepped closer. That your empire was already cracked. Turned slowed. For the first time, there was tension in his jaw. You think I don't see betrayal? I think, she said softly, you built loyalty on fear. Fear doesn't last forever. The words should have earned her death. But she wasn't wrong. And that was the most dangerous thing she could be. Downstairs, the wife received confirmation that one of her husband's most trusted lieutenants had transferred funds to an offshore account. Small amounts, carefully hidden. Not enough to accuse. Enough to prepare. The wife finally understood something chilling. The whisper hadn't started an affair. It had started a reckoning. Later that night, the lieutenant who left early during the celebration was seen entering a warehouse on the edge of the docks. The same docks where the shipment disappeared. He wasn't alone. Across the street, someone watched him. And that someone wasn't from a rival crew. It was the woman. She stood in the shadows, observing calmly, as if confirming a theory she'd held for years. Back at the mansion, the wife entered the study unannounced for the first time in their marriage. The king looked up, surprised, but not angry. Do you know who she is? The wife asked. The pause. Yes. Does everyone else? No. Should they? His eyes darkened. Not yet. That answer told her everything. The empire wasn't under attack from the outside. It was unraveling from within. And her husband, the most feared man in the city, was allowing it. Not because he was weak. Because he was waiting. But waiting for what? Forgiveness? Revenge? Collapse? Outside, the city lights flickered in distant thunder. Inside the throne room of the underworld, hairline fractures spread beneath marble floors no one believed could crack. And somewhere between obsession and strategy, between past sins and present power, a silent war had already begun. The throne still stood. But for the first time in years, it trembled. Power has a sound when it senses danger. It grows quiet. By the time the city realized something was wrong, the woman had already stepped inside the heart of the empire, not as a guest, not as a threat, but as a memory that refused to stay buried. She was no longer hiding. She didn't need to. The Underworld King began to notice the change first, not in numbers, not in territory, but in people. Men who once spoke confidently now measured their words. Orders that once echoed without question were now followed by pauses. Small ones, but deadly. In private, he watched her carefully. She sat across from him in the study, legs crossed, posture relaxed, as if she had nothing to lose. That illusion was deliberate. People who looked like they had nothing to lose were the most dangerous. "You're enjoying this," he said. She smiled, not warmly, not cruelly. "Enjoyment implies surprise," she replied. "I've been expecting this for years." He didn't ask what she meant. He already knew. Flashbacks haunted him, images he'd locked away behind power and success. The purge. The night loyalty was rewritten with blood. The choice, he told himself, was necessary. She leaned forward. "You don't remember their faces," she said softly. "But I do." The air thickened. 3 men, she continued. Founders. Brothers in everything but name. "You told the city they betrayed you." "They did," he said sharply. "They questioned you," she corrected. "That's not the same thing." Her words landed with surgical precision. She stood and walked to the wall where old photographs were framed, black and white images from before the empire became untouchable. Her fingers hovered near one frame but never touched it. "My father stood right there," she said. "On that floor. He didn't beg. He asked you one question." The king's jaw tightened. "What was it? Who are you becoming?" Silence. She turned back to him. "You never answered." Outside the mansion, movement accelerated. A rival faction made its first real move, raiding a minor operation with surgical restraint. No chaos. No bodies. A message, not a massacre. The city buzzed. Inside the empire, paranoia bloomed. 2 captains accused each other of leaking information. A trusted enforcer disappeared overnight. A warehouse burned, intentionally, cleanly. Each incident pointed in a different direction. Confusion was spreading. And confusion was her weapon. The woman didn't give orders. She didn't make threats. She simply spoke to the right people at the right time, and asked the questions they were already afraid of. What happens when the king falls? Who inherits the silence? Who survives the transition? Men who had never imagined a future without him began to imagine it. That was enough. The wife saw it too. She watched as old loyalties bent, not breaking yet, but bending toward self-preservation. She realized the woman wasn't seducing her husband. She was liberating him from the lie that his empire was stable. In the study, the king finally asked the question he had avoided since the whisper. "What do you want?" The woman didn't hesitate. "I want you to see it," she said, "before it ends." "Ends how?" She stepped closer, her voice dropping. Quietly, like it began. For the first time, uncertainty crossed his face. "You think you control this?" "No," she said. "I understand it." She reached into her coat and placed a folder on the desk. Names, dates, transfers, conversations he was never supposed to know about. His inner circle. Fractured. Preparing. "You let fear rule too long," she said. "Now they're choosing survival." His empire wasn't being attacked. It was being outgrown. That night, the king ordered no executions. No crackdowns. No shows of force. Instead, he watched. And waiting was more terrifying than violence. Across town, a meeting took place without his permission. Men spoke openly about succession for the first time in decades. They didn't know he knew. The woman stood across the street, watching the building where the meeting happened. She checked her watch. Right on time, she whispered. Back at the mansion, the wife confronted her husband again. She knows everything, the wife said. Yes. And you're letting her stay? Yes. Why? He finally looked at her. Because if I stop her, he said quietly, I prove her right. The wife understood then. This wasn't revenge. It was revelation. The woman wasn't destroying the empire. She was holding up a mirror. And the reflection was unbearable. As dawn approached, the woman disappeared again. No cameras, no witnesses, no trace. Only consequences. By morning, 3 lieutenants would make irreversible moves. By nightfall, someone would betray someone else. And by the time the city realized what had changed, the truth would already be too dangerous to contain. Because the most powerful weapon in the underworld isn't a gun. It's knowledge. And the woman who knew too much had finally decided to let the empire know she existed. Blood never spilled the night betrayal became official. That was the strangest part. In the underworld, betrayal usually announced itself with gunfire, screams, sirens cutting through the dark. This time, it arrived quietly, wearing suits, signing documents, shaking hands behind closed doors. And the Underworld King felt it before he saw it. He woke before dawn, not from noise, but from absence. No messages. No alerts. No late-night reports waiting on his desk. The empire was holding its breath. By sunrise, the first confirmation came. A port authority contact, loyal for 20 years, had resigned. No warning. No replacement suggested. Just gone. Then a bank froze one of the empire's oldest shell accounts. Not seized. Not investigated. Frozen. A polite way of saying, we're stepping back. Fear had learned to dress itself as caution. In the mansion, the king called a council meeting. The inner circle arrived on time, dressed sharply, faces composed. Too composed. They took their seats like men attending a funeral where they weren't sure who had died. He studied them silently. Each man here had sworn loyalty in blood. Each had benefited from the throne. Each now wondered if the throne would still exist tomorrow. Speak, the king said calmly. No one did. He nodded once. That was permission. One by one, they offered explanations, carefully worded, legally sound, morally empty. External pressure. Market shifts. Necessary adjustments. Temporary realignments. Not betrayal. Adaptation. The king listened without interruption. Then he smiled. It unsettled them more than rage ever could. You're all very careful, he said. That tells me everything. Across the city, the woman moved through a different kind of meeting. No table. No formalities. Just a quiet room above a closed restaurant, where former allies sat apart, not trusting the chairs beneath them. She didn't threaten them. She didn't promise protection. She told them the truth. The king isn't dying, she said. He's evolving. That frightened them. If he crushes you now, she continued, you become martyrs. If he waits, you collapse yourselves. She looked at each man. You already chose. I'm just acknowledging it. One of them finally asked the question they all feared. What happens when he realizes we're done pretending? She paused. He already has. Back at the mansion, the wife watched the council dissolve. Not with shouting. With distance. Men left in pairs. In silence. Phones already buzzing in their pockets. She stepped beside her husband. They're preparing to live without you, she said. He nodded. I know. You could stop this. Yes. But you won't. No. She searched his face. For her. For the truth, he replied. If I rule ashes, I deserve ashes. That answer chilled her more than violence ever had. That night, the woman returned, for the last time. She didn't knock. The guards didn't stop her. The study door closed behind them. It's begun, she said. He poured 2 drinks. Offered one. She didn't take it. They didn't spill blood, he said. They think that makes them innocent. She smiled faintly. Blood would have been honest. He met her gaze. You wanted this. I wanted you to see it. And now, she said, stepping back, I disappear. He stiffened. You think this ends without you? She shook her head. No. It begins without me. She reached into her coat and placed a single envelope on the desk. What's this? A message, she said. For when the silence becomes unbearable. Before he could ask more, she was already walking away. At the door, she stopped. My father believed you could become something else, she said quietly. Prove him right, or prove him dead. Then she was gone. By midnight, the betrayal crystallized. A lieutenant publicly resigned and took half a crew with him. No violence, no threats, just legal separation. Another aligned himself with a rival faction, temporarily. The city watched in disbelief. The empire wasn't collapsing. It was withdrawing. The wife stood alone on the balcony, city lights reflecting in her eyes. She understood something now. This was no coup. It was abandonment. Inside, the king sat at his desk, staring at the unopened envelope. For the first time in decades, no one feared him enough to stop. That was the true betrayal. Not knives. Not bullets. But the decision to walk away while he still lived. As dawn crept in, he finally reached for the envelope. Outside, the city waited. Inside the throne room of the underworld, power stood alone, unattacked, undefeated, and more vulnerable than ever. Because betrayal without blood leaves no bodies. Only consequences. And those consequences were just beginning. Silence is never empty. It is full of things waiting to happen. By the time morning arrived, the city already knew, without headlines, without sirens, that something had shifted. Phones rang and stopped ringing. Meetings were postponed indefinitely. Men who once demanded answers now avoided eye contact. The Underworld King stood at the window of his mansion, watching a city that still moved, still breathed, still belonged to him on paper. Ownership, he had learned, was an illusion sustained by belief. And belief was fading. Reports came in slowly, carefully, as if afraid of being heard. 3 crews had declared independence. 2 ports refused to prioritize his shipments. A rival family issued a public statement about peaceful coexistence. The word tasted like insult. His wife entered the room without ceremony. There were no guards between them anymore. That too was new. It's quiet, she said. Yes, he replied. That's how you know it's real. She looked at the unopened envelope still resting on his desk, the one the woman had left behind. You still haven't read it. I know. Are you afraid of what it says? He shook his head slowly. I'm afraid it confirms what I already know. Outside, dawn burned away the night. Normally, this was the hour when power reasserted itself, when orders went out, when fear was refreshed. Instead, there was restraint. He had issued only one command all night. Across the city, men filled that silence with their own decisions. A former lieutenant finalized a deal with a rival faction. A judge canceled a long-standing favor. A banker closed a door permanently. None of them spoke his name. That was the cruelty of it. In the study, the king finally broke the seal on the envelope. Inside was no threat, no demand, only a single sheet of paper. Tonight was never about destruction, it read. It was about choice. Below it, a list, shorter than expected. 3 names. 3 people still loyal. Or perhaps 3 people who hadn't yet chosen survival over allegiance. His wife watched his face as he read. She gave you options, she said. She gave me proof, he corrected. That I'm no longer necessary. The words hung between them. For years, necessity had been his shield. People obeyed because the alternative was chaos. Now they were discovering a different truth. Chaos could be managed. He folded the paper carefully. Outside, distant thunder rolled, not a storm, just sound echoing between buildings. The city was restless. By afternoon, a message arrived from the rival faction requesting a private meeting. Neutral ground. No weapons. No threats. An invitation. Once, such a request would have been unthinkable. Now it was inevitable. The king declined. Not out of pride. Out of certainty. He knew this wasn't ending in negotiation. It was ending in revelation. As night fell, the mansion grew unnaturally quiet. Staff moved like ghosts. Guards avoided the main halls. Even fear had learned to whisper. The wife stood beside him again on the balcony. "You can still burn it all down," she said. "They expect that." "Yes," he replied. "That's why I won't." She turned to him, surprised. "Then what do you do?" He looked at the city, his city, one last time. "You let them learn what happens when the silence ends." Somewhere far below, a car exploded, not his doing, not ordered, not controlled. A message from someone trying to fill the vacuum. He smiled faintly. They were rushing. That was their mistake. Minutes later, his phone vibrated. A message from an unknown number. "You waited long enough." He knew who it was. "Is she alive?" the wife asked quietly. "Yes." "Will she come back?" "No." "That scares you." He nodded. "Good." Because fear meant the game wasn't over. He picked up the phone and typed a single response. "So did you?" Then he powered it off. Across the city, something began to move, slowly, deliberately. Crews repositioned. Alliances shifted again. People realized too late that removing a king didn't remove the rules he created. At midnight, the king walked into the study alone and opened a hidden compartment beneath the desk. Inside was a ledger no one knew existed. Secrets. Insurance. The true architecture of the empire. He didn't burn it. He didn't destroy it. He locked it away. Because power, he understood now, wasn't about ruling forever. It was about choosing when to stop. As the clock struck 12, the city held its breath. The throne still stood. The king still lived. But something irreversible had been set in motion. Something no gun could stop, no loyalty could repair. Somewhere in the darkness, the woman watched the skyline, listening to the silence deepen. This was the moment she'd been waiting for. Not the fall, but the pause before it. Because when empires fall loudly, they are remembered. When they fall in silence, they change everything. And as the night stretched on, one truth became undeniable. The end wasn't coming with violence. It was coming with understanding. And when the silence finally broke, no one would be ready for what rose in its place.